American Horror Story first aired between October and December in 2011. After critical and commercial success, it has since released 9 seasons and grown a cult following. Roughly 10 years ago, when Instagram was only used by a handful of hipsters and Charlie Sheen was still winning, every angsty teenager was obsessed with AMS. Tumblr was full of heavily edited images taken from the show, and fans discussed episodes on forums and blogs. On its 10-year anniversary, I finally watched the first season, retroactively dubbed as Horror House, for the first time. But is it still as good after a decade? I'll discuss the season, its themes, and place in pop culture history in this video essay. Warning, major spoilers ahead. One can be easily fooled into thinking that the setup of Murder House is quite conventional for the horror genre. The premise rings quite similar to that of haunted house films like Amityville Horror, The Others, and Insidious. A troubled family moves into a new house with a sinister history after personal troubles worsen against the backdrop of increasingly disturbing paranormal activity. Despite this classical setup, Murder House distinguishes itself by a simple yet compelling premise. Everyone that dies inside the house is trapped there as a ghost, not recognizable as dead by the living. Many of the ghosts, often representing key figures from modern America's darkest historical events, are bitter and vengeful. As they haunt the house, many of them reflect the pain and the misery they have endured upon the new, unsuspecting hosts. It is a straightforward plot tool, but also an effective symbol for generational trauma and the lingering power of America's gruesome history that is kept alive through endless retellings in media and fiction. The pilot of Murder House is, as many critics have stated, not representative of the entire season. The first episode hastily introduces all of the Harmon family members, as well as multiple characters that will become important later in the show. The start of the series isn't promising. It feels disjointed and chaotic. Fortunately, the series quickly improves after the stuffy pilot, although the campy feel and chaotic editing remain. The progressive AHS was created by Ryan Murphy and Bradley Falchuk, who worked on Glee together before shifting their gears from musical melodrama to a series with a much darker theme. In terms of characters and casting, you could say that the first season of the anthology series was slightly ahead of its time. In 2011, woke-washing, diversity boards, and identity politics seeping into casting offices were not such an integrated aspect of the entertainment sector as in the current day. Despite the fact that almost all of the characters in Murder House are white, the series featured several queer characters and casted a girl with Down syndrome, Jamie Brewer, to play Adelaide, a character that became a fan favourite. I won't go into Hollywood's diversity politics, but it is notable that the first season of American Horror Story, however, did a splendid job of implementing these characters in a natural way. Co-creator Ryan Murphy, a gay man himself, is noted for having created a shift in inclusive storytelling that brought marginalised characters to the masses. Aside from its queer characters and minorities, Murder House stood out for being a show about women, or better yet, women suffering. Much screen time goes to Vivian Harmon, Connie Britton, the mother that got cheated on and reluctantly agrees to move to Los Angeles with her husband and daughter in hopes of a fresh start. Over the course of the show's 12 episodes, Vivian has to endure an awful lot of suffering. Her beliefs are discredited multiple times, she is raped and wrongfully locked up in a mental facility. She eventually dies tragically after giving birth, to the Antichrist that is. Her brutal arc represents the roads of biblical suffering that generations of women have endured. Men are more often than not antagonists in Murder House. Vivian's husband Ben keeps claiming he loves his wife, but discredits her suspicions with rational explanations and manipulation. When Vivian barely escapes an attempted recreation of the R. Franklin murders, she is determined to leave the haunted house, but her husband manipulates her in staying. Vivian is an intelligent and likeable character, but is constantly harassed, belittled, and questioned. She seems to represent the multifaceted victimhood of a wife and a mother in American society. She tries hard to stay sane, but all the odds are stacked against her. Her husband Ben tries to do his best to become a better husband and father, but his previous wrongdoings keep haunting him, eventually driving him apart from his beloved wife. American Horror Story excels in showing multifaceted women while simultaneously putting emphasis on their objectification. Moira, a housekeeper that was shot in the head because of her alleged role in an affair, inhabits Murder House as a ghost. Through the eyes of the male characters, she is seen as she was at the moment of her death, a red-haired femme fatale dressed in a kinky cleaning outfit. The men are only able to perceive her as an object of desire. The women, on the other hand, see her as a wise, elderly woman with a blind eye. Furthermore, there is the storyline of the Harmons' troubled teenage daughter Violet. She falls in love with the ghost of Tate, a murderous teen spirit. and only near the end of the show is revealed to be long dead herself, her body rotting away in a crawl space underneath the floorboards. Kate Mara plays a student with whom Ben Harmon started an affair. Halfway through the show, she is abruptly murdered by a former inhabitant of Murder House after a confrontation with Ben. She is then buried in the garden by Ben Harmon, who builds a gazebo on top of her grave. The bizarre scene can be interpreted as a metaphor. The young, aspiring girl is hastily buried under the gazebo, a marker of upper middle class homes, built by the man that used her and then threw her away like trash. Her vengeful ghost then spends days taunting and plotting. She eventually takes revenge by killing Ben in the series finale, ending the life of the last of the Harmons. Many viewers perceive this depressing conclusion as somewhat of a letdown, but I feel it is a strong ending that perfectly concludes the morbid and cynical story of Murder House. It seems as if AHS wants to say that the couple that was meant to be a perfect nuclear family was cursed all along. It was just a vain, modern fantasy that was never real in the first place, and now the spectral version of this fantasy will haunt the United States forever. One of the most compelling details about Murder House's dark ending is that it doesn't provide redemption. After the credits roll, the audience just has to accept that all the main characters are dead. They don't get to know why the house itself trapped the ghosts of the victims that tragically died between its walls. Was the house in itself a living demonic entity, a breeding ground for the Antichrist shaped by the devil himself? The answer is not explicitly given. It is part of the series' charm. Even though all the main characters' arcs are carefully completed, the reason behind the house's ominous powers remain ambiguous. During the season, a large array of historical horrors are revisited. This aspect is both a strong suit as well as a weak point of the show. Sometimes it feels like Murder House is trying to stuff every crazy idea and historical murder the writers could come up with into the rather short episodes. This creates a rather chaotic experience, with multiple side stories being introduced in every single episode. Still, the first season manages to stay cohesive and compelling overall, mainly because of its focus on the relational troubles between the Harmons. This focus, unfortunately, was lost in many later seasons, which often indulged in overcomplicated subplots that distracted from the main narrative. Murder House also artfully balances its tones, managing to be goofy, disturbing, and melodramatic, sometimes all at the same time. Like most of Murphy's projects, there is room for a large array of emotions, which often complement each other. It has to be said, though, that the first season is no masterclass in horror. Sure, it has a few scares, but it doesn't provide the dread of movies like The Shining or The Witch. Instead, it relies heavily on cheap thrills and jump scares. Rather than scaring the audience, Murder House tries to shock and disturb the viewer. With impressive practical effects, unexpected twists, and some of the most gruesome scenes in the history of modern television, the series kept me at the tip of my chair till the credits roll. The show kept me engaged by consistently putting the Harmons in all sorts of danger while slowly revealing how the inhabitants of the house have come to their gruesome demise. The series rarely gives the audience time to ponder over the endless row of murder and mayhem it enforces upon the viewer, but the somewhat goofy and cynical humour that is present throughout the series provides some much-needed room to breathe. Through dialogue, Murder House cleverly mocks Hollywood, gender norms, and the petty problems of the upper middle class.
Urban legends, they terrify me. Lately it's gotten so bad I can't even function.
When you say urban legends?
All of them. Bloody Mary, Candyman, Lady in White.
Children's ghost stories.
When I was younger, my brothers would tell them to me, hold me down, force me to listen to them.
Older brothers can be mean.
They were younger.
Yeah. Constance Langdon, played by Hollywood veteran Jessica Lange, is the intrusive neighbour, an ageing, conservative diva, still bitter over her failed acting career. She is one of the most profound characters present in Murder House, because as a viewer, you're never exactly sure what she is up to. Jessica Lange plays her brilliantly, dominating every scene with her striking charisma.
We'll make excellent parents.
Man shall not lie with man. It is an abomination.
So's that hairdo. But I figure that's your business.
Why can't you people just content yourself with having pets?
The title of the series is well chosen, for this series shows us the most violent and disturbing aspects of the history of the United States. There is a school shooting referring to the Columbine shooting, a character based on the murderer Harold Perelson, and even the ghost of Elizabeth Short, better known as the Black Dahlia, makes an appearance. The addition of these crimes, of which some still lie sensitive with the American public, is considered tasteless by some, but one might as well argue that Murder House is bold for not shearing away. It depicts the hidden problems of American suburban society and reflects on our taste for blood and dark history, perhaps best captured in a few scenes in which a group of tourists watch the house from a bus while a guide recounts the horrible deaths that happened there. Aside from historical crimes caused by real serial killers, deranged surgeons and school shooters, the violence featured in the show is more universal, reconciling America's societal problems with domestic abuse, hate crimes, and home invasions. The fact that the series is set in Los Angeles, a city that is both known for its glitzy facade of glamour as well as its dark underbelly of crime and death, is not a coincidence. The series uses the sunny metropole of the West Coast as a backdrop for its meta-exploration of America's bipolarity, the country's opposing reputation of glamour and crime. Some critics have dismissed American Horror Story Murder House as a corny piece of indulgent entertainment, but that doesn't do the series justice. Yes, it is chaotic. Yes, it is campy. And yes, some storylines aren't properly wrapped up. But despite its flaws, it is also a provocative yet layered show that boldly explores female victimhood and our collective fascination with the macabre. For those that weren't scared away by a messy pilot, a unique, self-aware horror series awaits. The beauty of Murder House lies in the way it explores fears that are both universal and contemporary. Without becoming overly nihilistic or depressing, the show reflects upon the common fear of dying too soon, of dying without being able to fulfill our deepest desires, or leave a worthy legacy. It tells us that we can never truly escape from the dead that are trapped inside the stories that we, despite their horrid nature, seem to cherish above all.
You gotta love this house.